The first thing Earth did was lie to us. From orbit it appeared tame. Blue oceans, drifting clouds, continents traced with the soft glow of city lights. I remember the quiet confidence in the command chamber as our fleet settled into formation. No alarms, no tension pheromones, just the muted hum of engines and the certainty of superiority. I was there as an observer, a xenohistorian assigned to document another inevitable conquest. Thousands of worlds had fallen before us. Earth, by every metric, was unexceptional. High gravity, yes, chaotic climate patterns, indigenous megafauna that would trouble an unarmored explorer. But none of that mattered. We had crushed worlds with living storms, planets where the air itself was toxic fire. Compared to those, Earth was merely inconvenient. The humans were worse, or so we believed. Our analysts described them as divided, inefficient, emotionally unstable, a species prone to internal conflict, still arguing over borders while standing at the edge of the stars. Their technology lagged behind ours by centuries. Their military doctrine was crude. Resilient, the report said, but only in the way vermin are resilient. Hard to eradicate, never truly threatening. Irrelevant in the face of a unified force. So we deployed. Not with hatred, not even with urgency, simply because Earth occupied a strategic corridor, and resistance, however symbolic, had to be removed. The first landings unfolded like a training exercise. Dropships cut through the atmosphere in perfect arcs. Our soldiers descended into ruined cities and dense green expanses, boots striking alien soil in disciplined unison. Weapon systems synchronized, armor seals intact. Local communications were jammed within minutes. From the observation deck, I watched tactical feeds bloom across the holosphere, squads advancing through empty streets, armored columns rolling past abandoned vehicles, drones sweeping forests that showed no movement at all. No human armies charged to meet us. No barricades, no last stands broadcast to the sky. Just silence. At first, this pleased the commanders. "They are frightened," one general declared, mandibles flexing in amusement. The others agreed. Victory projections shortened, celebration protocols were quietly prepared. I did not celebrate. The feeds unsettled me. Cities emptied too cleanly, settlements abandoned without chaos. Even their data networks, primitive as they were, had been wiped with deliberate care. It was not the chaos of panic we observed, but the order of preparation, as if an entire world had exhaled and stepped back into the shadows. I felt it then, the sensation of being watched. Not by soldiers, by the planet itself. Our troops advanced for days without resistance. They crossed deserts where the heat strained cooling systems, jungles that swallowed sensor signals, mountains where gravity pressed heavier than our simulations predicted. Still, no humans, only signs they had been there recently.
Warm shelters, fading tracks, food stores left behind, not looted, not destroyed, simply abandoned. I accessed ADER records that night, searching for something I could not yet name. Earth's history, its wars, its disasters. A pattern emerged that our analysts had dismissed as cultural noise. Again and again, humans survived events that should have ended them. Plagues, impacts, global collapse. They bent, retreated, hid, and returned. That was when I began my private logs. It was a violation of protocol, but I could not ignore the instinct clawing at my thoughts. I recorded my unease, my doubts about the projections, my growing suspicion that we were misreading silence as weakness. I wrote that Earth did not feel like a battlefield. It felt like a trap. On the 7th cycle, the first anomaly appeared. A recon unit reported environmental interference, minor, easily dispensed. A storm forming faster than predicted. A temperature swing outside expected ranges. High Command waved it away. Deathworlds were unpredictable. That was why we brought superior technology. Still, I replayed the footage from the initial landings, frame by frame, slowing it down. In one clip, a human structure stood at the edge of a forest, empty, doors open, nothing of value inside. But carved into the interior wall, so faint our scanners barely registered it, were markings. Not language, not symbols of surrender. They were directional markers, pointing inward, toward the forest. My thorax tightened. Humans had not fled randomly. They had chosen where to disappear. I closed the feed and stared at the hologram of Earth rotating slowly before me. Blue, calm, beautiful. A world pretending to be harmless. That was when the first screams cut through the command channel. And in that moment, with alarms finally igniting and confident voices turning sharp with confusion, I understood the truth we had missed from the beginning. Earth had never been afraid of us. Earth had been waiting. The first deaths were blamed on error, a miscalculation in atmospheric density, a delay in orbital forecasting, minor flaws, acceptable losses in the opening phase of conquest. That was the official explanation when an armored column vanished beneath a sudden flash flood, its vehicles overturned like discarded toys by water that should not have existed for another cycle. High Command logged it, adjusted the models, and moved on. Then the storms came. Not the predictable systems our climatologists had mapped from orbit, but violent, fast-forming tempests that erupted without warning. Winds howled with enough force to lift heavy infantry from the ground. Lightning struck with terrifying precision, tearing through shielded walkers and overloading power cores. I watched feeds of elite units scattered across plains, their formations breaking not under fire, but under rain and sky. Still, no humans. The next reports were worse. Seismic activity spiked along advance routes that had been deemed geologically stable.
Entire mechanized units were swallowed as the ground split open beneath them, armor plates scraping uselessly against collapsing Earth. The planet itself seemed to shift under our feet, reshaping the battlefield faster than our machines could adapt. Our science corps panicked. Models were rewritten in real time, probabilities recalculated again and again, only to fail minutes later. Earth did not behave like other Deathworlds. Its dangers did not follow patterns long enough to exploit. It was as if the planet generated catastrophe the moment we grew accustomed to it. Then came the sickness. Platoons that had survived vacuum exposure and plasma bombardment began to weaken inside fully sealed bioarmor. Fever spiked, muscles failed, internal bleeding appeared without visible cause. We isolated pathogens, neutralized them, only for new variations to emerge. Human diseases evolved at a pace that defied logic, adapting to alien biology with terrifying speed. "We are not under attack," a medical officer whispered during one briefing. High Command silenced him. Officially, the humans were losing. Sensor data showed scattered resistance cells, small, poorly equipped, always retreating. Victory reports flooded the network, every skirmish logged as a success, every human withdrawal interpreted as collapse. Commanders spoke confidently of the endgame, of mopping up operations and reconstruction. But I watched the battlefield recordings myself. Humans never fought where we expected them to. They did not defend territory. They did not hold lines. They appeared only when terrain itself became a weapon. In jungles, our alloys corroded under constant moisture and microbial attack, joints locking mid-combat as humans melted back into the foliage. In cities, entire blocks collapsed at the push of a single detonator, turning streets into vertical graves. In frozen regions, our soldiers froze inside suits rated for far harsher conditions, systems failing as human-guided winds drove temperatures beyond tolerance. Every engagement ended the same way. We advanced, we suffered losses, the humans disappeared. Fear crept in slowly. Warriors began requesting reassignment away from certain regions, areas the humans favored. Jungle units reported sounds at night, distant metal clanging, distorted voices carried on the wind, rhythmic impacts that never resolved into contact. High Command dismissed these as stress reactions. I did not. What disturbed me most were the moments between battles, the quiet aftermaths, captured by drones hovering over scorched landscapes. I saw humans emerge not to celebrate, but to retrieve their wounded. They crossed open ground under firestorms, dragging broken bodies through smoke and ash. They shielded each other with their own flesh. They died without hesitation so that another might take one more step. They did not scream for mercy. They did not plead. They did not surrender. They endured. One recording remains etched into my memory.
A human squad caught in an artillery strike, flames consuming the ground around them. Our weapons paused, assuming annihilation was complete. Instead, the humans moved, slowly, painfully, lifting the wounded, staggering forward together. When one fell, the others stopped. They did not leave him. They adjusted their pace, burning alive, until they vanished into the smoke. That endurance spread like a contagion through our ranks. Morale dipped. Warriors hesitated. Orders were followed with less certainty. Some soldiers began destroying their own visual logs, claiming the footage made sleep impossible. Fear, true fear, not tactical caution, took root. We had come prepared to fight an enemy. Instead, we were being worn down by a civilization that treated suffering as routine, that viewed loss as expected. that had built its entire existence around surviving the unthinkable and continuing anyway. I recorded another private log that night, my voice lower than protocol allowed. I stated that Earth was not merely hostile, it was selective. It punished predictability, it rewarded patience, and the humans, its native species, had learned to move in harmony with that chaos. They were not retreating, they were guiding us. The final report of the cycle arrived just before rest period. Another minor loss, a forward base gone silent after a routine supply drop. Command labeled it environmental failure and ordered the advance to continue. As the feed cut out, I caught one last image, a human-made marker, freshly placed at the edge of our perimeter. This time, the symbol did not point inward, it pointed deeper. And for the first time since the invasion began, I understood the terrifying truth. The planet was done testing us. Now it was teaching us how to die. Weeks passed, though time lost meaning on Earth. Our casualty reports grew so long that command summaries began omitting numbers entirely, replacing them with percentages and projections that no longer aligned with reality. Entire battalions went silent between check-ins, their last transmissions calm, professional, then nothing. Search drones found wreckage, scorched armor, sometimes nothing at all. It was as if the planet had swallowed them whole. And still, the humans endured. Their broadcasts began to bleed into our channels despite layered encryption. At first, Command assumed it was intentional, propaganda, psychological manipulation. But when I listened, I understood why our countermeasures failed. These messages were not meant for us. They were fragments of humanity speaking to itself. Simple words, spoken without grandeur, apologies whispered into handheld devices, promises made to unseen recipients light years away, parents telling children they love them, soldiers admitting fear, then steadying their breath and continuing forward. There was no triumph in their voices, no hatred, only resolve, quiet, unmovable.
It was then I realized something that chilled me more than any battlefield loss. Humans were not fighting to win. They were fighting because stopping was unthinkable. High Command escalated psychological warfare. Orbital demonstrations scorched uninhabited regions. Cities were erased from orbit, their destruction broadcast across the planet as a warning. Surrender, the messages demanded. The humans did not answer. Instead, resistance multiplied. For every city destroyed, 10 new cells emerged elsewhere. Smaller, faster, harder to detect. They adapted at a pace our simulations could not match, rewriting tactics between engagements while our models lagged behind reality. Weapons fashioned from industrial scrap disabled shielded walkers. Simple chemical charges penetrated armor designed to withstand antimatter bursts. Crude traps, pressure plates, collapsing structures, redirected natural hazards, obliterated elite units that had never known defeat. We began to fear their ingenuity, not because it was advanced, but because it was unrestricted. Humans did not seek elegance, they sought effectiveness. If a tool worked once, they improved it. If it failed, they discarded it without regret. There was no doctrine to predict, no tradition to exploit, only relentless iteration driven by necessity. Fear spread through the fleet, not as panic, but as exhaustion. Our warriors were trained for decisive engagements, for victory conditions. Humans offered none. Every advance cost us blood, every withdrawal cost us dignity. Even our victories felt hollow, purchased at a price that grew heavier with each cycle. Then there was the recording. I hesitate even now to describe it, but it must be preserved. A forward assault unit preached what appeared to be a minor human shelter, unmarked, structurally weak, tactically irrelevant. Thermal scans revealed non-combatants inside. Protocol dictated elimination to prevent future resistance. The unit advanced without urgency. And then the human appeared. He emerged alone from the shelter's entrance, already bleeding. One limb was gone, severed, not cauterized. He used the wall to remain upright, his body trembling with shock. His weapon was primitive, damaged, barely functional. By all metrics, he was already dead. He did not advance, he did not retreat. He stood between our troops and the shelter. I watched through the squad leader's optics as targeting radicals locked onto him. Orders were issued, weapons raised. And then, hesitation. Several soldiers failed to fire. Their vitals spiked, stress indicators flared. One requested clarification, insisting the human pose no threat. The human met their gaze. There was no defiance in his expression, no rage, only certainty. He knew what would happen. He accepted it, and still he did not move aside. A commander overrode the delay and fired. The human fell instantly, but the moment stretched longer than any simulation predicted.
That pause, those few heartbeats of hesitation, were enough. Civilians fled through a rear passage, disappearing into underground routes we would never fully map. Hundreds escaped because one human chose to stand still. The unit completed its objective. Yet afterward, 3 soldiers requested psychological withdrawal. One removed his helmet and vomited, despite the toxins in the air. It was not incorrect. It was humanity. That was when fear truly took root in the fleet. Not fear of defeat, we still believed victory possible, but fear of what victory would demand, of how many such moments would be required, how many bodies would need to stand, unflinching, between us and our goals. I filed my report that cycle with uncharacteristic honesty. I wrote that humans could not be broken by threat or loss, that annihilation only sharpened their resolve, that they measured success not by survival, but by meaning. The response from High Command was delayed. When it arrived, it was brief. As the message faded, new alerts lit the holosphere, multiple fronts collapsing simultaneously, resistance activity increasing in regions previously declared pacified. The humans were no longer reacting to us. They were dictating the rhythm of the war. And as I watched the fleet strain under a conflict without end, I understood the final horrifying implication. If humans could endure this, if they could choose suffering again and again without breaking, then there was no force in the galaxy that could ever truly stop them. The next transmission arrived moments later, marked Priority Black. It contained only one line. All ground forces, hold position. Earth, it seemed, was not finished with us yet. The final offensive was meant to end the war. It was called Total Convergence, a doctrine reserved for conflicts that threatened the authority of the unified species itself. Orbital dominance secured, atmospheric control established, coordinated planetary sweeps timed to the millisecond. Never before had so many ground forces been committed to a single world. Millions of soldiers, tens of thousands of armored vehicles, an armada in the sky to watch it all unfold. I stood on the observation deck as the countdown began, my reflection faint against the curved glass of the viewport. Earth rotated below us, scarred now, burn marks across continents, cities reduced to skeletal outlines. High Command spoke in measured tones, confident once more. The humans had bled us, yes, but now they would be overwhelmed. History, they said, would remember this day as the moment chaos was corrected. I believed them. At 0 mark, the invasion began. Dropships fell like meteors. Orbital strikes severed suspected resistance zones with surgical precision. Ground armies advanced along corridors cleared by weeks of bombardment. Every variable accounted for. Every contingency planned. The holosphere filled with icons, friendly units advancing in perfect symmetry, arrows driving inward toward the last human strongholds. For the first hour, reports flowed smoothly. Then communications began to stutter. Not fail, stutter. A delayed check-in here, a corrupted data burst there. Command attributed it to atmospheric interference. Earth's storms again. Adjustments were made, signal relays boosted, the advance continued. Within 3 hours, entire divisions stopped responding. No distress calls, no battle reports, just silence. I watched officers cluster around tactical displays, mandibles tightening, eyes darting between shrinking data feeds. Recon drones were dispatched immediately, their feeds routed directly to my station. What they showed made no sense. Battlefields littered with our wreckage, burned-out walkers, shattered armor, overturned supply carriers, signs of fierce combat everywhere. And yet, no bodies, no human dead, no human wounded, no human at all. Only empty terrain and the unmistakable markings of evacuation, trails leading away from the fighting, access points sealed after our forces passed through. The humans had not stood their ground. They had moved us. Panic rippled through command channels as more units vanished. Supply lines failed next. Depots reported intact inventory but no personnel. Automated systems continued running until they were deliberately shut down. Codes used that should have been impossible for humans to access. "They're inside the network," someone shouted. "No," a strategist replied quietly. The truth unfolded with horrifying clarity. The humans had predicted total convergence, studied our doctrine across centuries of recorded warfare. They knew how we escalated, they knew when we would commit everything, and they had prepared, not to resist it, but to let it pass through them like a blade through smoke. They lured us deeper, bled us slowly, fed us victories that cost too much. And when the moment came, when our army was fully deployed, fully committed, fully exposed, they closed the trap. Environmental systems failed in unison. Temperature control spiked and plunged beyond tolerance. Life support filters clogged with particulate matter introduced deliberately into the atmosphere. Navigation satellites were blinded. Command units were isolated by cascading signal blackouts that rippled faster than we could reroute. This was not chaos. It was choreography. Earth itself seemed to participate. Storms erupted along retreat vectors. Seismic activity collapsed fallback routes. Wildfires, human-made and natural, cut off extraction zones minutes before arrival. Everywhere our forces turned, the planet answered with violence perfectly timed. And still, no human armies, only absence. By the 6th hour, High Command's voices had changed. Confidence gave way to urgency, urgency to fear. Orders contradicted each other as the scope of the disaster became undeniable.
Millions of soldiers deployed, and nothing to command. That was when the word no commander ever expects was spoken aloud. The order was immediate, absolute. All surviving units were to disengage and withdraw to orbit. Extraction points were designated at random, anywhere a ship could land without being torn apart by Earth's fury. Very few made it. I watched extraction feeds with growing dread as ships descended and never returned, as landing zones went dark seconds after touchdown, as desperate pilots reported movement, not enemy fire, but terrain shifting beneath them. And then, silence. Hours later, the holosphere was empty. No friendly icons, no enemy markers, just the slow rotation of Earth below us, unchanged, indifferent. Of the millions deployed, only one ship answered the recall. It limped into orbit, trailing debris, its hull scored and partially fused, as if the planet itself had tried to reclaim it. Emergency lights flickered across its surface. Life signs registered. One. A single survivor. They brought him aboard under full quarantine. His armor was warped, bonded to his body by heat and pressure beyond known tolerances. He resisted medical intervention with surprising strength, lashing out until sedatives finally took effect. When he awoke, High Command demanded a debrief. He said nothing. Not a word. Not a sound. Hours passed. Then days. He stared at nothing, eyes tracking movement no one else could see. When asked about the army, about the battle, about what happened on Earth, he remained silent. Until one night cycle, as I reviewed casualty logs that no longer used numbers at all, an alert chimed softly at my station. Audio detected. The survivor was speaking. I leaned forward, breath held, as the feed activated. And in a voice barely louder than a whisper, trembling with something far worse than fear, he finally broke his silence. "They knew we were coming," he said. The feed cut to black, and in that instant, I understood the scale of what we had lost. Not an army, but the illusion that we were ever in control. They brought the survivor to me because I was the only one who asked to listen. High Command wanted data, coordinates, tactics, explanations that could be quantified and archived. I wanted truth, the kind that does not fit into reports, the kind that stains the mind and refuses to be erased. As xenohistorian, I was permitted a private debrief, sealed from the command network. What I received was not a testimony. It was a warning. He entered the chamber escorted by medical guards, though he scarcely seemed aware of them. His armor was still fused to his body, warped and blackened, bonded by heat and pressure no battlefield should produce. They had cut away what they could, the rest remained like a second skin. His once proud posture had collapsed inward, shoulders rounded as if bracing against an invisible weight. His eyes never stopped moving. Even seated, even restrained, they tracked corners, vents, shadows.
He flinched at the soft hum of life support systems. When the lights dimmed slightly for the rest cycle, his breathing spiked and he clawed weakly at the restraints until the brightness was restored. He did not sleep. Not truly. Medical logs showed he entered rest for minutes at a time, never more than 3, before jerking awake in panic. Each time the same word tore from his throat, raw and broken. When he finally spoke to me with intention, his voice fractured as if unused, each syllable dragged up from somewhere deep and buried. "You think they fought us," he said. "That's the mistake." I remained silent. Silence, I had learned, was the only thing humans respected. Perhaps it worked on those who had faced them too. "They hunted us," he continued, "not with armies." He described running battles through shattered terrain where no enemy units appeared, only individuals, humans without uniforms, without insignia, farmers carrying explosive charges made from fertilizer and scrap, engineers who disabled shield generators with tools meant for construction, teachers who lured squads into buildings already rigged to collapse, remaining inside to ensure detonation. "They knew they would die," he said, mandibles trembling. His claws tightened against the restraints as if gripping a memory too sharp to release. "We were faster, stronger, better armed," he whispered. "It didn't matter. Every time we killed one, the rest became more dangerous, smarter, angrier." He spoke of ambushes where humans waited for hours in toxic rain, unmoving, just to strike a supply runner. Of civilians who feigned terror only to lead patrols into dead zones. Of families who stayed behind, not to survive, but to slow the advance long enough for others to escape. "They don't fear death," he said then, looking directly at me for the first time. His eyes were wet, unfocused. That sentence settled into the chamber like a physical presence. He described the moment his unit finally broke, not under fire, but under realization. They had cornered a group of humans near a subterranean shelter, non-combatants by our definition. The humans knew there was no escape. Instead of pleading, they formed a line, not to fight, but to delay. "They smiled at each other," he said, "not at us." His voice dropped to almost nothing. "We won that engagement," he said, "but when we advanced, the shelter was empty." After that, he said, his soldiers stopped sleeping, stopped trusting silence. Every civilian became a potential threat, every shadow a choice. Advance and risk everything, or hesitate and doom another unit elsewhere. The humans forced them into moral fractures no armor could protect against. "They made us choose who we would become," he said. At the end of the debrief, his strength failed him. He slumped back against the restraints, breath shallow, eyes fluttering. Before the medics could intervene, he reached for me weakly. "Promise me," he rasped. I leaned closer. "Promise you won't let them come back," he said. I did not answer. I could not. He saw the truth in my silence and gave a sound that might once have been laughter. "They'll forgive you," he murmured, slipping toward unconsciousness. As the medics sedated him, I stood alone in the chamber long after they left. My reflection stared back at me from the transparent barrier, older, diminished. The survivor did not sleep again that cycle, or the next, and as I reviewed his testimony, one realization eclipsed all others. If humans could do this without ever leaving their planet, if civilians could break armies through will alone, then the galaxy had not faced humanity at its strongest, only at its most restrained. Outside the viewport, Earth turned slowly in the void, and for the first time I wondered not whether we should return, but what would happen if one day they didn't wait. The decision took less than one cycle. That alone should tell you how afraid we were. Emergency councils convened across the unified species, their chambers sealed, their proceedings scrubbed from public record before the final vote was even cast. I was present only because someone needed a witness, someone to remember what the official archives would soon pretend had never happened.
Earth was reclassified, not merely as a hostile world, not as a failed campaign, Deathworld Prime. The designation carried weight older than any living empire. It was reserved for worlds deemed fundamentally incompatible with conquest, planets whose ecosystems, inhabitants, and unpredictable variables combined into a level of risk no strategic gain could justify. Deathworld Prime meant absolute quarantine. No trade, no diplomacy. Human space was sealed by invisible borders enforced by fear rather than fleets. No one argued. Fleet remnants were recalled and dispersed, survivors reassigned under silence oaths so severe they altered neural pathways. Official records were amended, then erased. The invasion was reduced to a logistical anomaly, a failed expedition blamed on environmental instability and incomplete data. Casualty numbers were deleted, ship registries quietly adjusted, entire army designations vanished from history. To the public, it would be as if we had simply never gone. Unofficially, everything changed. Every military academy received an addendum to its core doctrine. It was brief, stark, unattributed. Never engage humans on their own terms. No explanation followed. None was needed. Those who had been there would understand. Those who had not would feel the unease in the words and carry it with them into every future command. As for me, I was ordered to submit my logs for sanitization. I refused. They came as a request first, polite, procedural, then as a command, then as a warning. I listened to each in turn and archived my records anyway, encrypting them beyond standard authority, fragmenting them across redundant systems hidden in forgotten corners of the network.
Not out of defiance, out of obligation. The galaxy deserved to know the truth, not of our failure, but of human strength, of what happens when a species evolves not to dominate, but to endure, when survival becomes culture, when loss is not an end, but a reason to continue. I wrote everything. The silence before the first shots, the storms that chose our soldiers as targets, the civilians who stood still so others could run, the army that vanished without a final scream. I wrote of the survivor who could not sleep, of the word he whispered like a curse and a prayer, of the fear that followed us back into the stars. When I finished, I sealed the archive and marked it as a warning disguised as history. Earth was left alone after that. No probes crossed its borders, no satellites lingered in its shadow. We watched from a distance, if at all, and over time, even that vigilance faded. Empires rose and fell elsewhere. New threats demanded attention. New wars consumed new generations. But the doctrine remained, whispered in strategy halls, taught in hushed tones, passed from mentor to student with a look that said, "Do not ask. Never engage humans on their own terms." Sometimes, late in my rest cycles, I would replay old footage, Earth turning slowly beneath our fleet, deceptively calm. I would wonder what the humans learned from us, if anything, whether they remembered the invasion at all, or if it had already been folded into their long history of surviving the impossible. One thought returned again and again, colder than any fear I had felt during the war. We had marked Earth as forbidden, not because we could not defeat humanity, but because we were no longer certain we deserved to. The quarantine holds, for now. Yet, as I archive my final notes and prepare them for release beyond official channels, I cannot escape the sense that this story is unfinished, because death worlds do not stay contained forever, and species like humans do not endure in silence indefinitely. I waited until the noise of history moved on. Empires are loud when they are afraid, but time dulls even the sharpest panic. New conflicts rose, new threats demanded fleets and attention. Earth became a footnote, then a rumor, then a prohibited coordinate most officers could not place on a star map without assistance. The quarantine held not because it was enforced, but because no one wished to test it. That was when I sent the warning, not through sanctioned channels, not under my name. I encoded it as a narrative, an unclassified xeno-historical account formatted like a myth, the sort of thing scholars skim and commanders dismiss. Stories pass where reports are stopped. Stories are remembered when data is erased. I did not describe Earth as a planet. I described it as a crucible, a place where life is forged under constant pressure, where extinction is a recurring challenge, not an anomaly, where survival is not heroic, it is expected.
Humans, I wrote,
did not evolve to dominate their environment. They evolved to endure it, to adapt faster than disaster, to turn suffering into instruction. I described how they fight, not for territory, not for glory, but for each other. I told of civilians who stood in the path of armies, of farmers and teachers who chose to become weapons so that strangers might live, of a species that measures victory not in conquest, but in continuation. I did not exaggerate. There was no need. The most important truths are already unbelievable. At the end of the transmission, I included a single line of personal commentary, something no academic would ever permit, which is why it survived review. The message dispersed across open networks, copied and recopied by curious minds who sensed weight beneath the words. Some dismissed it as fiction, others flagged it as prohibited knowledge. A few, far fewer than I hoped, understood. Those few grew quiet. I monitored responses for several cycles. There were no acknowledgments, no replies. Warnings, I learned, rarely provoke immediate reaction. They lodge themselves in memory, waiting for a moment of relevance. That moment will come, because humans do not remain still forever. Their signals already brush the edges of monitored space, primitive, curious, hopeful, probes bearing symbols of greeting, broadcasts filled with music, mathematics, and invitations to listen. They do not sound like conquerors. Neither did they sound like prey. I wonder which version of humanity will step beyond Earth when the day arrives. The cautious explorers, the unified survivors, or the descendants of those who learned, in fire and silence, what the galaxy is willing to do to them. When that day comes, my warning will resurface. It always does. Someone will remember a forbidden story. Someone will hesitate before issuing an order. Someone will ask why an entire planet was left untouched in a galaxy that consumes everything. And maybe, just maybe, that pause will be enough. I do not know if the humans would forgive us for what we did. The survivor believed they would. I am not so certain. Forgiveness requires memory, and we worked very hard to erase ours. Still, I hope, because if humanity reaches the stars carrying the same resolve I witnessed on Earth, if they bring with them the quiet certainty that no sacrifice is too great to protect their own, then the galaxy will face a choice it has never truly considered: to welcome them, or to learn, far too late, why Deathworlds are not meant to be challenged. As I close the final channel and watch the transmission scatter into the void, one thought follows it, unspoken but heavy. The warning has been sent. What happens next is no longer in our control. I often wonder what the humans learned from us. Perhaps nothing at all. Perhaps everything. We came to their world as a catastrophe, another disaster in a long history of disasters they had already survived.
Invasions, extinctions, plagues, collapse. We were not unique. We were merely the latest proof that the universe is hostile and that survival is never guaranteed. They will rebuild. They always do. Earth will scar over. Cities will rise where ruins once smoldered. Children will be born who know nothing of orbital fire or alien armor fused to flesh. The stories will fade into myth, then into cautionary tales told to keep future generations vigilant. Humans are very good at that, at carrying trauma forward without letting it stop them. And one day, inevitably, they will look up, not with fear, not with hatred, but with curiosity. They will wonder what else is out there, who else survives under strange suns, what voices echo in the dark between stars. And when they take their first true steps into the galaxy, they will not come as conquerors shaped by dominance, but as survivors shaped by endurance. That is what frightens me most. Because the galaxy will remember only fragments, a redacted campaign, a forbidden coordinate, an army that went to a death world and never came back. But I will remember more than that. I will remember the silence before the ambushes, the civilians who stood still so others could live, the survivor who begged us never to return, not in hatred, but in understanding. I will remember the species that did not break when logic said they should, the species that turned suffering into strength, the species that taught us the true meaning of resilience. If the stars are wise, they will greet humanity with open hands. Because if they are not, if they make the same mistake we did, then the next warning
will not come as a story. It will come as an ending.